blade that you can do, like maybe I can go right there, and I can lock his blade in, I'm sorry, like I'm going to go right here. So we have a little triangle, and I have control with my strong part of the blade on his weak.
Right.
And then I can say do a bind and control it. But the trouble is that it
harder
will,
to do when it's round.
Slide right off.
Right, yeah.
It will slide right off. Whereas if he were to do the same action for me, I'm locked against that corner.
Right.
Or the same with a shell shape. There's that vertice right there in the middle where it would get locked.
I imagine they do it that way these days because there's just less binding and
there's
and
no binding.
fencing.
Yeah. Okay, so now check it out. There's your S curve. This is where your manipulating fingers go.
So right here.
Yep.
Oh, right. I'm gonna have to get used to that.
Yeah. And then rest your thumb on the corner. Okay.
So that does feel much more comfortable with it, because now I don't feel like I have to slant my wrist.
Yes,
over.
and and you're going to have the cant there. And if you guys decide to get like a foil later and you want it canted or it doesn't, either way I can help you fix that. It's no big deal. Even if it means just taking it home and putting it in a vise for a minute. Okay. Now this classical grip has that swell on it, so it's different, right? It's not the S curve, and that one has a subtle swell as well, but it's a bit beefier, right? Okay, all right, so we talked about on-guard position, right? How to hold that weapon, and let's just see if we can't put it all together, okay? So let me grab one of these here, grab this one. I feel really bad that you guys are in the sun. Are you comfortable? You all right?
It's not too hot right now,
okay.
It's all good.
All right, so again, first position, nice and vertical spine. Take a look down, you should be at 90 degrees. In theory, if we were all lined up, you would be toe-to-toe with an opponent, right? Literally on that line of direction, okay? And first position, you got the palms upwards, right? Take a nice deep breath and think about, that like a string coming up through your spine, out the crown of your head, right? Okay, and then what typically you do is you take a deep breath, and then when you exhale, you step out into that on-guard position. So find what feels comfortable and then look down. You don't want to be much wider than shoulder width. A little wider is okay. Narrower is probably not that good. Okay?
Then your center of gravity is a little off.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And then take a look at the orientation of your knees. Right. You want to gradually, and you don't want to force it right now if you're not limber enough, but you want to stretch that out over the next, say, it usually takes at least 3 or 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks.
I think it took longer than that for me.
Yeah. Completely understandable. But remember, always knee over foot. Okay, and that goes for the back knee as well. Okay, and again, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's totally okay if you take an obtuse angle with your feet. You want it at least 90 degrees or up, or greater, whatever you're comfortable with. Okay, and then the on-guard position. If you guys why don't you find what you think is the appropriate position with your hand, and then I'll come around and I'll adjust. Right? Okay, so old hard habits die hard.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
I'm just gonna have to think about that more.
Yep. Okay, good. And I would say loosen up, but that's good. Okay, now probably a little bit over rotated. Put your thumb on this corner right here. This one? Yeah, there you go. There you go, and looser. Okay, and then let's see that hand position. Yeah, that's good. And I would say that's actually a really good height if we were to fence. I would say that's really good, except you are also on center line. So let's put that out over there. Yeah. And you know what? Also, just because of what you're used to, it might be better if you actually had a canted blade to help you with that angulation and the wrist. But good height. Okay. All right. Now, how are you guys feeling as far as hips and knees and everything? Are we okay?
Oh, yeah.
Weird?
I definitely need to build some more stamina on my knees for sure.
Okay, weird.
I need to work on that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, here's the other thing that you do to work on things. Let me just take a quick look at it. Okay. All right. So the other thing that you can work on that we talked about before is advancing and retreating, right? So why don't we do this? How about you guys switch, and we'll have your back here facing that direction. You guys can be more in the shade. I'll trade you positions, and we'll do a little bit of advancing and retreating this direction. Okay. All right. And then remember, we're standing and sitting and going into that position and taking a break. That's totally fine. And if you feel fatigued, no problem. Okay.
Are we worrying about the left arm at this point,
or? I'll tell you what. Let's address that let's come on guard and let's address it, because you raise a good point. I haven't talked about that yet. Okay. So yeah, come on guard. Okay, you're a little bit over rotated, so think about this being 45.
There we go.
There you go. And again, about 45. Yeah, 45 degrees, right? Because remember, you want to.
So this line gonna be aligned with.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
that's a lot.
Well, and point into the right. I mean, in theory, you and I would be fencing right here, right? Yeah. There we go. Okay, good. Now, in classical fencing, at least, the only prescription for what we call the offhand, which does not have to be gloved unless you're doing small sword, because then you actually are grabbing the blade occasionally with small sword, is back behind the ear somewhere. Okay, and it's really nondescript from most fencing masters, right? But back behind and nice and relaxed. Okay, you don't want it to be all tense.
Does it have to be up?
It should be in classical fencing,
Okay.
and the reason for that is you have like this cantilevered system, right? It's balanced.
Yeah, it's like a back sail.
Yeah. Okay, now let me point something out to you, and I'm making you, I'm having you stand, in this position to like build up muscle tone. But let me just show you with the rear hand, the offhand. If I bring that hand forward, look at what happens to my rear shoulder, right? So I present more of my target area to you guys. So, to the degree that you can, you want to also work on, the term is effacing yourself, so that you are more, effaced. So that you're,
Less of a target.
yeah, less of a target. So with that shoulder further back, and meaning that rear hand, the off hand, is further behind you, that helps you naturally efface your torso, so there's very little target, yeah? Okay? And so if I were, are you okay if I touch you? I mean, I'm looking at your eyes. So if I were to land a touch on Aiden, if I do get there, it's probably going to skid. It won't stick.
Yeah.
Whereas if he brings his shoulder forward, boom, right? Okay. All right, so now, how about you guys stand up and let me just show you, and relax for a minute, and then let me show you the basic advance and retreat. And I know this seems really elementary. I'm going to repeat something you heard me say 1,000 times before. In classical fencing, you've got to learn how to walk differently. Okay, and I won't like overanalyze it too much, but here's the gist. We have been walking our entire lives pretty much by lifting up our front foot and kind of falling forward. And we do that without even thinking about it, okay? You can't really do that in classical fencing. You can, but it announces your intention to your opponent. So you want to work on gliding across the floor as best as you can. And so if it's done well, it's kind of graceful like in dance, okay? So it takes practice. And just be patient, because if you stick with these basics to begin with for the first literally couple of months, it's going to seem really slow. But once you get the basics down solid, then it's very easy to like put all the pieces together, and pretty soon you're doing basic fencing in classical style. And then within a few months after that, you're kind of an intermediate classical fencer, right? Depending upon you. I mean, we all learn at different speeds, right? Okay, but what we're going to do, I'm going to turn to the side so you can watch my feet here. And I'm not going to worry about my upper body for the moment, just focus on my feet. So I'm in that on guard position right like that, okay? Now, one of the things that you could do to help you with this is put more of your weight, instead of being evenly distributed, equally over your hip carriage, which is totally fine. But one of the things that you can do is to shift that weight to your rear foot. Okay, now this takes a lot of effort and practice, because what happens is you really have to build up your off leg, your rear thigh, because you're shifting from, instead of half of your body weight, to maybe as much as 7/8, at least 3/4. Now you don't have to do that, but it will facilitate easier movement. Okay, and in classical fencing, it's generally considered, particularly if you're going to do like small sword, you want almost all of your weight on the rear foot, because you want to be able to do what's called an appel. And you do an appel to even check your weight distribution just by lifting that front foot. So if I'm equally distributed, I can't really lift that front foot well. I mean, I can, but I'm going to fall forward, right? So you should be able to lift that up and not have any problems, okay? Now, if you can do that, then you lift up your foot, and I'm going to exaggerate. You lift your toe, and then you literally glide with that lead foot right parallel to the surface. And you take a step. And the step that you take ought to be the distance of your physical foot. So a step for me in advance would be here, right? It's real easy to take a big step like that, but you don't want to advance on your opponent, right? Because they've got sharp, stabby stuff pointed at you, right? So when you go forward, just one of your foot lengths, okay? And I'm going to put it down right there. and then I'm going to immediately take the rear leg and bring it back in the same relative position to where I was. And again, in theory, if you're doing it perfectly, and let's say I had my weight shifted to the rear leg, I should be able to propel again. Okay? So what not to do is to lift your toe really high and raise up, go forward and fall down. Now, I'm exaggerating, of course, but that becomes a very strong visual cue to your opponent that, hey, here he comes, right? And also the toe. It becomes once you learn how to look at what's going on with your opponent, it's really easy, even though I've got my eye contact on your blade or your eyes, and my peripheral vision, I'm seeing your toe, right? So in theory, you're just gonna slide, okay? So it ought to look something a little like this. Not that I'm the perfect master at it. Right? Okay, and then retreat is exactly the opposite, except you can take a bigger step backwards, right? So if you're going to retreat, getting away from your opponent, big step, not a problem, but you're going to go back about one of your foot widths, and you're going to immediately bring that lead foot back and assume the same relative position between your legs so that you can rappel again. Or a big step. Okay, but you would never, I say never, you would rarely want to take a huge step forward and come forward. Okay? Good? Okay, so how about we try? How about we try? Okay, yeah, come on guard as you're comfortable with. Yeah. By the way, in classical fencing, there are a lot of times that people want to meet in a park so that they can use the uneven ground because it's much more realistic, right? So I don't know. But of course, we don't want anybody to roll their legs.
Yeah, as long as you don't trip and fall.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so we're gonna come on guard, right? Okay, nice vertical spine. Yep, and are you good with stepping forward there, Jose? Okay, so yeah, so go ahead and yeah, there you go. Yeah, okay. And I'll tell you what, don't go anywhere. I'm gonna move this so I got a little bit more room.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No problem. Okay, all right, so here's what I want you to do. I'm gonna take a step backwards. I want you guys to take a step forward. Okay, and we'll go a few steps, and then I'm gonna come watch you do it, and then we'll go backwards, okay? All right, so all together, 1, 2, 3, advance. Yeah, okay, a little bit bigger step. Yeah, it feels weird?
No, I'm just being shy.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, advance. Yeah, there you go. Okay, now you realize you're dragging your foot.
I heard that.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, advance. Okay, good. All right, now I want you guys to stay where you are, and I'm gonna watch you guys advance, and we're gonna just continue for a few more steps. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3, advance. Okay, now Aiden, I want you to look at where my point is.
Yeah.
So you took 1.5 feet.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so let's do it one more time. You ready? 1, 2, 3, advance. Okay, so that's just a little bit more than a foot. You're probably good there. Don't, I would say that at the most. Okay? All right, so David, let's watch you go. 1, 2, 3, advance. That's good, man. 1, 2, 3, advance. Okay? All right, and then Jose, let's see where you're at there. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3, advance. Yeah, perfect. 1 foot distance there. 1, 2, 3, advance. Good. Okay, are you feeling okay with the hips and okay? Now let's try the retreat.
Way more of a strain.
Oh yeah.
But it feels good for the control.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah, and again, you know, even though you do something probably very similar in HEMA, I mean, you are almost certainly using different muscles. Let's try to go from where we are to it's known as a retreat, right? So again, you are going to just do exactly the opposite. It's okay to take a bigger step back and then immediately bring that foot back. Don't drag it, but bring it right back relative to where you are. Okay? Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3, retreat. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, retreat. There you go, retreat. Okay, now everybody stop. Freeze where you are and look down at your toes.
Oh.
Yep, good job. And that's just about, hey, you don't walk like this normally, right? Yeah. Okay, one more.
Start walking around like this.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, you ready? We're gonna do another retreat. 1, 2, 3, retreat. Okay, retreat. Okay, and then how about first position and relax? Okay. All right, how does that feel for you guys? I mean,
Not too bad. I'll get used to it.
Yeah?
The knees definitely need some work.
definitely
I
feeling
think
it?
I'm used to stepping a little further, but
Yeah.
I've been practicing
And-
a little bit on our off time between our
Yeah,
last
good.
class.
That muscle tone will help. And similar but weird, huh? Yeah, does it seem more controlled, you say?
Just like the Spanish say where we used to practice with my friends back home.
Yeah.
Yes.
and it'll probably
Those
always
are
feel
the same.
kind of like that when you're doing a new
Yeah.
form anyway.
So it's
Yeah.
here.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So while we give like your bodies just a moment to rest and catch up, let me just throw something out here. If we were to do classical fencing the right way, meaning, just the way I understand it as the Martinez Academy teaches it, all of the motions are very reserved. And that's a big difference between what a lot of other people who say they do classical fencing do. Because usually, other people who are not like trained in the formal school of classical fencing, they resort to incorporating very sport-like fencing moves. And in sport fencing, remember, it's all about speed, right? It's all about speed. So I land a touch against you first. It doesn't matter what happens afterwards as long as I get there first. Yeah. And that's just the evolution that has occurred. Tag. It is, yeah. And again, I say this all the time because I have huge respect for the reaction time and the speed of those sport fencers. The Olympians are incredible. Okay, but you would never behave that way with a sharp sword, right? And so classical fencing is based on the premise that what we do, we behave as though we have sharp weapons, and so you inherently have to be very reserved with your movements. So speed does get used in classical fencing. I'm not saying we move in slow motion, but it's a combination of being very measured with what you do and using timing to your advantage as opposed to speed. Whereas a sport fencer is going to react almost always or almost entirely on speed. Impressive speed, right? With classical fencing, I'm going to try to figure out what I can learn about you and the way you fence, what you're strong at, what you're weak at. I'm going to groom you, as it's kind of known. I'm going to really condition you in our bout that we have so that you're fencing at whatever speed I want you to fence at, and then I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I've conditioned you to move slower than you should be moving, okay? But that does not mix with a system where somebody's fencing sport style. Because if I'm going to do classical fencing and be very reserved with my movements and use timing to my advantage, if someone else is playing by a slightly different set of rules, they're going to go on speed. They will almost always, not always, but almost always score a hit against me because they aren't playing the same game, right? So just keep that in mind. One thing, and I'm also stalling again to kind of give you guys a little bit of time there with your bodies to kind of to recuperate. Wait right here, I'm going to show you something. Okay, so Aiden and I are wearing basic, sport fencing jacket, right? And these are totally fine for what we do. They're good, they're inexpensive, they're durable. You throw them in the washer, no problem. If you get the cotton kind, no trouble at all. But they're a modern fencing jacket, and it includes the cuissard down here. And you might think that that's about protecting the groin. It's not. Yeah, it's not what it's for, right? The reason that there's a cuissard on a modern jacket is because the Olympic sport movements are so exaggerated, and there's a lot of leaning like this, which you would never do in classical fencing, right? And so the cuissard keeps the jacket down. It covers up your target area, because in foil, your target area is the torso, including the groin, right? And so this keeps the jacket down. Okay, now a classical fencing, here's my favorite, this is my favorite jacket. It's a classical style jacket. It's actually from like the 80s. It's a French prieur. But see, no cuissard, right? This one also happens to have like a little bit of quilting to add padding. That's a preference thing. I mean, I bought it because unbelievably I found one that fit me online for 25 bucks, and it was a prieur.
I found one at a flea market.
Did you really?
Yeah, I have it hanging
man.
Yeah,
out
you
at
go
my
to
house,
Oxford and just find like really good stuff.
Yeah.
Really old.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got an antique mask that I fence with this in too. This is a modern version because of course Velcro, but typically there would be buttons there. But that makes it a classical jacket. So look, if that's something that you want to do, and okay, great, that's fine. It actually changes the way you fence, as well as like saying wearing athletic shoes. So I'll give you an example. Patrick, the guy I was telling you about from Columbia Classical Fencing, he always fences with formal pants and conservative leather patent shoes.
Hot.
A little bit, but when you have those types of shoes on, you fence differently.
Yeah, these are excellent shoes.
Yeah, there you go. So, and when you have like really solid grip and lots of padding, you're going to do things that you wouldn't do if you were dressed differently. So, some of these schools that come out of the Martinez Academy
academy, they even require like certain clothing and uniforms. And you can't just go buy a jacket like this anymore. They have to be like custom made. So you're talking like $350 just for a jacket.
Which sucks because they look a lot cooler. So.
Yeah. Now, there are some other options out there. So if it's something that, say, like, for example, in a month or 2 or 3, you want to get a jacket, I can point you to some resources. You know, I can't vouch for the quality or durability of any of that, but that's definitely an option. So I just wanted you to be aware of one of those differences. Okay. Now, I've been talking at you a whole lot. I'm wondering, do you have questions? Is there something that you're wondering?
Is that the patch from Colombia?
Yes, yeah. Patching. Okay, and this one's got a patch. So at least in the classical fencing world, most people, when they start, they just have a basic jacket that they use and it's not patched. And the convention is that once, I mean, it depends on the particular school, but once you've demonstrated adequate, I hesitate to use the word mastery, but adequate skill of, say, like basic foil, then you get like patched in as a club member. And a lot of clubs use this as an indication that person knows the basics and they can go in when there's free fencing time to just fence without an instructor.
Yeah, they don't just do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason for that, I know it sounds crazy, it's not about ego or anything like that, at least not with the people that I've worked with. It's about making sure that, one, you're fencing in a safe way, but two, and perhaps more importantly, is the idea that you are not establishing bad habits. Because here's the thing, and this is going to be the challenge, particularly for you two. Not that you have bad habits, it's just that
Different habits.
Yeah, different habits. And so it's harder to unlearn something. If you learn it one way, but then you need to do it a different way, you have to work way harder at making a new connection, literally in your brain, so that you get the motions down in a different style. And so, like, I imagine for you, center line and maybe speed.
Yeah, I've been having to think about that a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah. So that's the Columbia Classical patch. So I mean, there's not a patch for us yet. I mean, because
Are
we're
we
trying to
planning
get
on
going.
one?
What's that?
Are we planning on one?
Yeah.
I like that.
I think the eventual
Yeah.
plan is to have
I like
enough
that.
folks to get a club together.
Yeah.
Like a NASCAR jacket.
Yeah.
There you go.
Get
Everywhere.
Wonder Bread patches.
Yeah.
You know,
Wonder Bread.
Sponsorships.
Wonder
yeah.
Bread.
I got the
Couple
Twinkies
bread.
patch, guys.
Twinkies. I love it. Okay, any other questions?
Not really.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure I'm not keeping you guys too
So
long.
Hope we have more folks next time.
Me too.
Are we planning on 1 hour or 2 hours?
Well, I would like to do, say, like an hour 15, something like that. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And then let's see how it goes too, because if we're finding, like, let's say it's a small group, but let's say it's just us, and you guys want to do more, if I can make that work with my schedule, I'm game for it.
Sure.
I'm game for that. Now, I'll have to go back through my list, but there were at least 2 other individuals and a father-daughter combination that were very serious about coming and joining us. I know that father has since gotten a big job promotion, so I don't know what their situation is yet. But Maya, the teenager, the high school student, she's definitely committed, and she also told me that she has a friend at the classical academy that she goes to a classical academy school, and I think that's her interest in classical fencing. She has some friends that are also very interested, and they didn't want to start in the summer because of the heat, which is kind of smart actually, right?
Bad.
Yeah.
It was rough.
Yeah.
What about historical sources? Are we working with any specific historical
Yeah,
sources?
so it's a combination of sources, but largely derived from Angelo, as you would probably expect, right? But I've learned. Sorry, I got like sunscreen in my eyes now. I mean, as you know, there are a bunch of French sources, and because of my just association with Patrick in Columbia and his ability, he actually is interpreting several books. Getting them up to English modern translations. I have knowledge of a number of different sources. Boissier. But I think that it's easy to focus on, say, Angelo. Not that Angelo is the be-all, end-all, but Angelo did a huge amount for classical fencing.
And it's still 1700s, right?
Yeah. Really. So think of Angelo at the time of the American Revolution. And just real briefly, just a little bit about Angelo. Angelo was an Italian, right? And he lived this pretty incredible life. But he goes to England. He goes to France. He learns French fencing, and then he goes to England. And because he's from an upper class environment, he gets in with the upper class of England and starts teaching French fencing. And he actually becomes the fencing instructor of King George. as in King George of the American Revolution. It's pretty
Wow.
good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Something like Quevedo and the older nations of Spanish.
And then when the French, and during the Age of Enlightenment, when Diderot goes to write the Encyclopédie, he does something that just rocks the upper class of all of Europe, and especially French. Instead of going with a French master, and there was a very firmly established French school, kind of approved of by the King of France, instead of going with a French master, they go with Angelo, and they use Angelo's descriptions.
The Wikipedia.
Yeah.
That's
And then there was this huge outrage in France, like how dare this Italian upstart go? How is he the model of classical fencing when they've been doing it for 150 years, in France? So it led to a bunch of stuff happening in the political world, and it actually leads to the standardization of several things in classical fencing. So now when we refer to our hand positions as sixte and octave and so on, that comes out of the French response to Angelo, because the French said, oh, we got to get our craft together.
Right. Yeah.
Standardize this thing.
Yeah.
For
Yeah, and so then it becomes standardized. Yeah. And then, about the same time, people are realizing that fencing can also be used for physical fitness and health, and also for social reasons to keep yourself elevated above the lower class, right? And then that eventually give it another 100 years, and then you've got the advent of really sport fencing, until you get to the time of this guy, Marignac, the guy that invented that square coquille. It's now the French school. Yeah. It's the French school versus the Italian school, and Marignac, the Italians were mopping the floor with all the French people, and Marignac said, we got to do something different, because the Italian school is so powerful physically with how they use their blade, and so he said, we have to have a stronger way of controlling their blade. So he came up with the square edges, and that's really kind of like at the end of classical fencing
they
theory.
basically make about here.
Yeah.
So they,
Yep.
It's like having another
Yep.
edge.
Yeah,
That's
and
nice.
and remember, those Italians, they've got that belted to their wrist. It's like driving a Mack truck. You can get through anything. Once you grab control of someone's blade, it's over. If you're up against a French person, you can just, and you're using Italian style, man, you just go at it. And the Italians, the Italian school is a much more aggressive stance, right? And you kind of think of them as being scorpions. So they're very low to the ground. So this is very Italian, and you lean forward like this.
Very strong legs.
Very strong legs, yeah. And remember, this is clamped to your wrist, and it's super aggressive. Whereas the French is like, oh, let me interact. Let me like get a taste of this and then back out, right? And not the Italians, man. It is aggressive.
They're gonna buy the whole farm.
Yeah. And we can explore some of that. Not that I certainly don't know Italian well, but particularly once we get basic French foil down, then we can move in a couple of different directions. And I'm comfortable doing saber, particularly cutlass saber. So Angelo had a grandson that went on to write the naval manual for the British Navy on saber. And it's real easy to turn into cutlass and use for single stick. I'm real comfortable with that. Saber is so much fun. But and I think you guys probably know this. If you start with saber first, big flourishing movements, lots of circles and sweeping.
Yeah.
It's so much fun. I love it. It's very fluid and flowing.
And the single stick.
Oh yeah, single stick for
Single stick
practicing
is
that.
catching up a lot.
Oh yeah.
There's competition.
Yeah, so single stick is like the practice weapon for the saber, basically. That's how it got started. And you can make one with a bucket and a stick. Like you really